your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Chrissie is hilarious.
Chrissie, have you ever heard of the comedian Basha K. Ali?
No, that sounds like something you yell out before you blow up a plane.
30 seconds remaining.
But you know what? Good thing to say I dabbled in stand-up or something. I haven't been disrespectful to you at all.
I was very confused by the title, Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that's also what we call it when Ash takes off his shirt. I shouldn't be up here. I should be in school on the other side of the ocean. What's up, boys and girls? Welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast. That's the Chrissie Mayr Podcast. You can listen to us on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, Rumble, Rockfin, Twitter, sometimes Facebook, if they're not feeling sassy, sometimes Twitch even. As always, keep those guest recommendations coming. I want to schedule a bunch more for the fall. Before I bring in our fabulous guest, I got a couple of stand-up comedy gigs to promote this Saturday. Actually, before this Saturday, this Thursday, I will be doing a show at the Comic Strip Live in New York City. So if you're a New York City person, you can come on out and see myself and Gino Bisconti at 8 o'clock at the Comic Strip. And then this Saturday, I'm doing a comedy fundraiser in Mayapack. So if you live in Peekskill, Putnam, anywhere sort of in the upstate New York area, come on out this Saturday at 6:30. I believe the location on this was changed, but I will get that updated ASAP. But it's in Mount Kisco, so it's similar location. Then I'm headlining in Minnesota Saturday, October 21st at the Great River Bowl and Partners Pub in Sartell, Minnesota. Lila Hart will be featuring for me, and Nick Rekieta will also be there doing a guest spot. Is he gonna do comedy? Who knows? I just said, come on, Nick, do whatever you like. The stage is yours. So we'll see. We'll see if he's funny. Then I'll be back on Long Island at the Brokerage Comedy Club October 27th and 28th. Then I'll be in Florida headlining in Tampa at Side Splitters Sunday, December 3rd. Then back to San Diego at the beginning of the year, January 5th and 6th. I will be back at the Mic Drop Comedy Club for 3 shows, 1 Friday and 2 Saturday, including a late night show for you late night weirdos. And as always, if you know of a cool venue, tweet at them, tweet at me. I'm constantly booking stuff. I'll perform anywhere, as you all know. Okay. First time on the show. I'm very excited to have this gal because she's the real deal. She is the founder of Counter Trafficking Alliance, as well as the Daily Traffic. She's very passionate in her work against human trafficking. I've yet to find someone who's pro human trafficking. I guess those people don't want to hang out with me. And she has a fabulous YouTube channel where she posts a ton of deep dives with receipts into these deep topics. And she's here today to talk a little bit more about it. Welcome to the show, Natly Denise.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Clap, clap.
Clap, clap, clap. I love the green, calm aesthetic behind you. You're not falling into the trap a lot of YouTubers do that I've fallen into, which is just knickknacks galore.
And I do have them. I've got all my little Tim Burton stuff like over there somewhere, and the little weirdo stuffed animals like robots and Kermit the Frogs. So they're kind of out of shot, but I got them.
You have knickknacks, but they're not closing in on you. Like
right. Exactly.
Natly, I think you're just awesome. I love your YouTube page. You can tell anyone who watches any of your videos knows that you're so passionate and you are the real deal and you care so deeply about just creating a positive force in the anti-trafficking movement. And you have such an interesting backstory, and I'm not going to have you go through your whole thing, but
Sure.
you went from working at Mac, which is
Yeah.
I had a time in my life where I was like, I think I'd really like to work at Sephora. Like, I just, a lot of us don't know what to do with our lives. And I was like, well, I like makeup.
Yes.
And it was from, if you want to briefly go over
Yeah.
how you went from working at a Mac makeup store to kind of having a religious awakening, and then
Yeah.
being called to really pursue this work of being
Yeah.
anti-sex trafficking.
Sure. Yeah. So not wearing any makeup right now, so apologize. But
Girl,
I
you're
was
safe for me.
I was a makeup artist at Houston Galleria, which is the biggest store in Texas. And I was a Mac artist and I just kind of immersed myself. That was at the time where makeup was really emerging. It was the early Instagram days. So
2010s, right?
yes. Yes. So, all of these personalities and makeup enthusiasts, right? A lot of it was driven from MAC Cosmetics, which was a very interesting time to work there. And, I immersed myself in different types of makeup techniques, theatrics, drag. And, I would get hired to do freelance makeup work, for whatever occasion, whether it was for bridal or, again, theatrics, what have you. And one of my best friends, who was also a fellow makeup artist at Mac Houston, she actually had more of a Christian awakening before I did. And she was actually interning at Lakewood. And from there, she was doing some sort of campaign, and she was like, "Hey, Nat, I need an extra hand on set for this makeup shoot. Can you do it?" And I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "It's going to be theatrical, and the kit I need you to prepare for." So we have different makeup kits. And I was like, "What type of makeup are we doing?" And she said, "Well, theatrics, and it's going to look like domestic abuse." And I was like, okay. And I mean, I've done, different makeup looks
I'm
before.
just imagining like domestic abuse, but make it fashion.
Right, exactly.
Industry. I feel like it's
100.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's what I thought. I mean, and it was just so, it was so secondhand for me, where it was like, that's fine, whatever. So I get on set, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking this is for a domestic abuse campaign. And she's like, "Okay, I need you to make these girls, the models, look, yes, roughed up, but I also need bruises on their arms and things like this." And I was like, okay. And so I kind of reaffirmed. I was like, "So is this like for a domestic abuse campaign or something?" And she was like, "Oh no, this is for human trafficking. We're doing an awareness campaign." And that was this was in 2012. So I had no idea what human trafficking was. I was like, what is human trafficking? And so the models on set were actually also, Christian girls in this ministry that were doing this whole, campaign. And so they all explained to me what human trafficking was, and they were replicating. It was a photo shoot for the End It campaign. And back then, End It was one of the first awareness campaigns. And so they did this really theatrical photo shoot where they had X's on their mouths and
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, cool. So I was so I did my best and, got them all readied up and all that. But then I, at that time was also soul searching, and I felt empty. I had just gotten through a really rough breakup. And so I was really heartbroken and just really searching through life, who am I? What do I do? And I do remember when I broke up with the relationship, I had asked, it would look like thin air, hey, okay, fine. I don't know how to pray, but this is me. Okay, whatever. Just do what you need to do with me. And so I kind of really felt pulled towards the Ministry of Human Trafficking Awareness. And so I joined these girls. They ended up being my friends, and we ended up doing like little like really grassroots stuff that they were like, okay, let's go meet with the sheriff. Let's meet with this other ministry in Houston called Freedom Place, which, by the way, if anybody's looking for a ministry to pour into for, saving kids, that's one in Houston. It's called Freedom Place, but the head ministry is called, what is it called? Arrow Family Ministries.
Now, why is Houston such a hub for sex trafficking?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Now, Houston is on the port. It's on the port. We've got everything, right? We've got the border to our left. We've got the port to our right. So you've got all types of trafficking activity happening. People can import humans through the channel. And that's another part of my testimony. So there are cantinas on that channel. So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll work on the ships, and when they get off of their ship shift, they'll get off and they'll look for entertainment. And so they'll go to these things called cantinas, and a lot of people don't. I'm very surprised that this is not like bigger news, or that a lot more people don't know about this.
Familiar with Taco Bell cantina or the Star Wars cantina? That's really the extent of it.
Yeah, but and the thing is, like, this has been kind of like an open secret in Houston that just it's not been resolved because a lot of cartels run these cantinas. And so let me give you a little bit of of what these are. So their cantina in Spanish means bar. And so people think that they're going to the bar, but really they have these trafficked girls and women in these bars, and they'll have like trailers in the back of the bars, and they'll hide the sex, or they'll have the sex workers, live there. And so the John will come in and buy a beer or a drink, and that's basically their ticket for sex. And so they'll transaction, hey, yeah, I want an hour, 2 hours with, and then they'll point out the lineup, and they'll pay the fee that the madame or the head trafficker.
Is it like when you go to a comedy club, you see like who's on at 7:30, who's on at 8?
Not necessarily.
My basis for this is literally just the movie Taken, and then sorting through random Eliza Blue lies.
Right.
That's my experience.
So, in Taken, when they're spoiler alert, guys, and if you haven't seen the movie by now, too bad. You should have. Taken, so when they are exhibiting the girls for buying, they're auctioning the girls, and they'll kind of display them out. Well, that's a glamorized way to buy a girl or a woman. In cantinas, they literally line up the sex workers like in the back or on a bench. And so the John can just go pick out, whatever woman or girl they want to go have sex with. So that's part of it. So I went from visiting Freedom Place Ministries, which is it's a safe house for rescued children that are sex trafficked. Okay, so I went there, visited the kids, and seeing 9-year-olds there, 12-year-olds who have been through hell and who have been exploited through adults. It's just like, oh my God, who can do this to a kid? Especially when you interact with them, it's completely different from just reading a headline or, reading something shocking. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a kid that has a spirit and has emotions and has a little body, and someone exploited that little body, and they just,
From your experience, did it seem more just, okay, these kids and women are doing things like sexually way sooner than they would ordinarily, or is it more like violence, abuse that way, or is it both, or I guess it varies place to
Yeah.
place?
That's a really, really good question. I'm glad you asked that. So let's start with the children first, and we'll kind of work our way to adolescent to adult. Now, children, sometimes it's very nuanced. A quick answer, it's nuanced. So children, especially, they come out of broken homes. So sometimes in these situations, it can be familial trafficking, which they'll have an uncle or an aunt who want to make a buck on the child. And so they'll literally sell the child to their friends to molest or to, whatever they want to do. And so they'll exploit the child that way. Another way is, of course, the familial, molestation. It can start that way. And then if it's not familial, then there are traffickers, actual pimps and traffickers out there that are they are very educated. There's actually a manual called Pimpology where they will literally teach techniques.
Sounds like something Andrew Tate would talk about.
Well, actually, that's Iggy Semmelweis, who is the wizard of the Tates or whatever. He's like one of the I don't know what he is. He actually suggests 3 books: How to Dump Your Wife, Pimpology, something. And there's another one that I
How to Dump Your Wife? Why do you need a book about that? Like, just keep calling her fat until she gets fed up.
I don't know. But yeah. So the trafficker, they're very, very skilled about what to look at. So they'll see a child to tween, whatever, and they will know that these are low self-esteem children, or that they don't have what they need at home. And that can be like the mom can't even afford meals for them, which
was the case with Epstein, because the girls that were vulnerable were just girls that lived in Palm Springs that were like, oh, $200 is $200. Like, I just need my presents,
100% exactly. So it's like, they literally just need money for like school supplies or backpacks or whatever. And the pimps will exploit that. So that's another thing. And then there's the lover boy Romeo pimping, where everybody's more familiar with that, where they will pretend that they want to get the girl or the tween or the adult female in a relationship. They'll ensorcel them, and then that's where they flip it, right? So that's how it happens. A lot of times with the children, it's familial. A lot of times not. But yeah, that's from the experiences that I've had at the safe house and learning about some of the children. A lot of them were familial trafficked.
Whoa, which ties in very much with the border crisis, and that a lot, and even reporters that I know that are down there, they're like, yeah, you see kids coming over by themselves, kids weirdly just with one guy or that's pretty suspect. And it's like, it's unbelievable. Like, you don't want to actually, and I had a few months over the pandemic where I just had too much time and too much internet, and I feel like I'm never going to be the same. I feel like I learned some things, like, and everyone has that point, hopefully, in their awakening where they are just like, wow, I could either let the knowledge of these truths completely black pill me and send me into a depression, or do I take the knowledge and see how can I make a small positive impact?
Right. Yeah. So border trafficking, man, I mean, there's so many things with that, because the cantinas also play into that as well, right? They get trafficked in here. So let me tell you the most common trafficking scam that happens on the border, right? So a lot of these, what they're called coyotes, or traffickers in English, or smugglers, whatever we want to call them, what they will do in Mexico, and you see this on Facebook, they have Facebook groups that are dedicated to advertising their travel packages, right? And they'll advertise these things like, hey, we're a service. We're going to smuggle you into the United States. We know the best breach points, blah, blah, blah. It's a total package of this amount of money. Let's just say it's a couple $1,000s. And they will basically, they'll entrap. I say entrap, but because a lot of times these people are scammed into coming over here. A lot of times not. It's very nuanced once again. But the ones that do pay these coyotes the money, they'll smuggle them in, right? And then you'll see like the wristbands that they come over with. A lot of times those are, or more times than not, those are classifying systems of this is how much they've paid me, this is how much they owe me. This is a tracking mechanism. And so once they bring the immigrant here, they'll say, especially if it's a young lady, they'll say, okay, I charged you, let's just say $3,000 in Mexico. Well, here in the U.S., there's inflation and the pesos, they don't transfer over to that amount. So you actually owe me, and they'll say, let's just say it's $2,000 on top of that fee. So what are you going to do about it? And they know that these people are poor. They know that they probably give their entire life savings to just get smuggled over here for the initial fee. So they're like, okay, so what are you going to do to work that off? So now you can use your imagination. They'll put them to work, whether it's sexual exploitation or, labor servitude. So that's what happens a lot of times with these immigrants is they're entered into the labor trafficking or sexual exploitation. And it's crazy because New York Times actually did an article investigation on this. Yes, the New York Times, like they actually documented that there are children that are illegally entered into our workforce and they're immigrants. They're working for, I think it was like Fruit of the Loom and Cheerios and stuff like that. So these are like actual big companies that have child labor.
Like
yeah.
They're in the factories. Like they're just kind of like a nameless worker bee. Wow. Oh, yeah, that's, I guess, not shocking at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's absolutely recognized. From the Department of Labor, they have, I guess, threatened. I don't know what's going on, honestly, but it's like, 85,000 kids who are unaccounted for, and here's another thing that I know I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, but there's just so many items and elements to the border. A lot of times, these kids, like, let's just concentrate on the kids for a second. When they're planning to come over, they already know who they're going to. And that's already suspect to me, because you would see these kids come over to the border, and I'm going to take this little sticky note and just pretend it's a little note. They would come over the border and they would unfold this piece of paper out their pockets and say, oh, I'm going to John Doe in Los Angeles, California. So they already know where they are going. Now, the thing is, that's when they're unaccompanied. They don't come with anybody, and they'll say, if I question them in Spanish, I'll say, like, where are you from? They'll say Honduras, which is a very, very southern part of, it's going past Mexico, going towards the South American continent. It's very far off. So a little kid coming from Honduras by themselves is very suspect that they would come here by themselves. So they had some sort of help along the way. And then they come over with a piece of paper, telling us where they're going, which sponsor they're going to.
Giving them that piece of paper.
Exactly.
Right. Like, the average kid is not going to know how to contact a coyote and like have dollars ready to go.
And see, here's the thing, like, it's the NGO, like, we suspect, I can't say for sure, right? But we suspect for sure, like, there are some NGOs across the border that are helping with this coordination, because the HHS, so there's the HHS and then there's the ORR, right? So the ORR is a little child's office of the HHS. The ORR stands for the Office of Refugee Resettlement. They are in charge of processing these undocumented children. If you go to the HHS website, you will see that the criteria for sponsorship is pretty much anybody. And I actually like mapped all of this out like myself. It can be an unrelated sponsor, a parent, a legal guardian, an immediate relative.
Health and Human Services, or
yeah, I think if you type in sponsors or sponsorship, you should be able to find some sort of sponsorship.
Oh, unaccompanied children released to sponsors by state.
Yeah. And I think towards the bottom there should be some sort of criteria, or that's just a number count.
Oh wow.
Yeah. You see, so this is happening. This is
total number of. These are just the number of kids.
Yeah.
That come across by themselves.
Yeah. Yep.
That are end up assigned to different states.
Yeah, and that's why the sponsorship matters, because distant relatives, immediate relatives, or unrelated sponsors can take these kids.
Wow, nobody's sending them to Vermont for some reason. They're like, too cold. We don't like Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah. That's crazy, though. These counts are insane.
Yeah, a lot going to Texas, New York, because New York's basically New York City's still sanctuary status.
Mm-hmm.
And Texas is a hot mess.
Okay, yeah, Texas is bad. In New Yorkers, I mean, I guess they're starting to wake up, because they're starting to see, oh, this is what it means when we have like unchecked, unvetted people, basically living right next door to where our children go to school, or, where they're housed right next to where our children go to school. So a lot of people are kicking in their senses, like, this is what it means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes so much getting to a point where they're having to put like migrants, in an empty gymnasium while class is in session, or all the hotels are filling up in the city, and it's just Eric Adams is so incompetent, it's ridiculous. But they still they're like sending them over. So
yeah. I mean, he welcomed them in, and then he's like, and I don't know if he genuinely means that he's concerned, but it's just like, it's a little bit optimistic to me that a lot of New Yorkers are like, oh, okay, this is what they're complaining about in the South. This is what it actually means, and why people were so reluctant to have open borders. So I don't know, man.
Okay, so I feel like I jumped you around from your kind of origin story into talking about the border, but yeah, you did go through from working at Mac to getting, and then when was your kind of, I guess, were you raised Christian, or did you just kind of have an awakening when you were going through this process of becoming passionate about sex trafficking?
Yeah, I mean, I was going through a rough time. It was like a bad breakup, and so that was like it. I was just so really heartbroken at that time. It was like in 2012. I was like, I was at such a bottom barrel where I was just like, I'll talk. I don't know if you're hearing me or whatever, but I'm just giving up. I'm surrendering. And it literally looked like that. It was very simple. Yeah, I give up.
It's kind of freeing.
It is. It's very freeing. And it's like, that's literally what faith is like, you don't know what comes next. You don't know if, you're going to be taken care of or what, but you're just surrendering. So that's what I did. And, that's when I found those girls at that photo shoot shortly after. So that's how I kind of found my purpose and my faith around the same time.
And you guys were actually, you were going to these cantinas, you were meeting and talking to girls and women that were working, and you have to be very tactful and very specific in how you talk to these girls, and you can't just be like, because I'm sure their pimps, their handlers are like saying, especially when they're at the border, you don't need help, you're fine. Same thing when you went and visited these girls at the cantina. No, you're fine, you don't need help. Like, if people talk to you, just say you're good.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's heartbreaking because these sex workers are under trauma bonds, right? So trauma bond is when you're so kind of you're coerced, you're fear-based coerced into what you're doing. And it's even worse. This is a trafficker's dream, because a lot of these undocumented people, these immigrants, these illegal immigrants, they're here. They have no tracking system. They have no number, no nothing, right? So they're just here meandering through the United States with unaccounted for. And so these traffickers know that. They can put them in a cantina and fear-based coerced them. So we would go in. I went from serving at a safe house at Freedom Place to serving with Eliza Rising in Houston. So Eliza Rising is another big organization here, and I actually learned more by going through their van tour. So they'll take, and this is crazy, I wish like more people did this, but they'll research like the most affected parts in Houston that are, sex trafficking hubs, and they'll put you in a undisclosed van, and they'll drive you through these parts, and they'll basically educate.
Wow. So it's like a ride along.
Yes. And so it's crazy because it's like, they at that time they researched like who owns this brothel, and it's like people who are in the oil and gas industry, like this person's connected to this and that. You can look at the property records. So if you could imagine like that I was like, whoa, okay, cool. Like I didn't know this and that, like how connected this was. And so I was so intrigued by this ministry that I actually volunteered with them. And that's where I did the cantinas with Eliza Rising. And they would have like these nights once a month. It was like every fourth Friday where you can, there were guys who would volunteer at the brothel. So they would go volunteer to, act like a John. They would go in and actually pray with the sex worker. And they'll say like, give them words of affirmation like, hey, you're important. You don't have to do this. If you, just know that there's a bigger plan for you. And so they would pray with them. Our job was like the same. We were, from a ministry, and we would basically, because I'm bilingual, I would go and talk to them in Spanish, basically, let them know the same thing. Like, hey, we're from a church. We love you. We know that you're in a hard situation. If you ever, need prayer or need something else, just you can count on us. So it's kind of like you have to unwire and finesse them out of that trauma bond, because that's how they're going to leave. It's very, 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 very hard. It's like Stockholm syndrome. A lot of these sex workers are not going to just leave nilly-willy. It's not going to happen. They're so entrapped in this psychological bond that it's very hard for them to just leave whenever. So yeah, that I went from cantinas, but I wanted to connect that to the border somehow, because a lot of these unaccompanied minors, they actually end up at these cantinas, and which is one night. We've always had a problem with the border, right? It's not just under Biden. It's been long turning. I remember one night, and this was like the night that ignited a fire under my ass. I saw at this cantina, she looked about like 11 or 12 years old in the lineup bench, like in the back. And I was like, oh my God. Like I checked my watch. I was like, it's midnight, or it's like close to midnight. It's dark outside. This is a bar, right? This is a bar, 21 and up, right? So it was like I was piecing all these obvious things together. I was like, oh my God, this kid is being trafficked right before me, and she's sitting on the lineup bench. And that was a really impactful experience, because you can't impersonate in any form or sense. If you're doing ministry work, if you're in a militia at the border, you cannot impersonate police officers or military, or else you'll get in big time trouble. So I called HPD, Houston Police Department, and basically filed. I was like, yo, like there's a girl at this cantina, blah, blah, blah. Next day, it was like the next day or the next day after that, the detective calls me, and he's trying to get like more information about the description of this girl. And then I later get another phone call that they, kind of trying to affirm these details. And he told me basically that they went to the cantina and they could not find the girl, that the girl must have been moved or what. So that just like, that mystery is what really compels me to keep going. Cause it's like, how can you not find a 12-year-old girl? Like, and she's just gone, and she, like, her existence is just a mystery. Like that's what really, really drove me really forward on this type of calling. So that's just another
Yeah.
experience.
And you realize I have a certain set of skills.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah, exactly.
and,
Exactly.
and this question here, who would use a brothel? This is in 1884. And I think a lot, they're not,
Mm,
it doesn't say brothel. I think these are massage parlors. These are
yeah.
bars. These are places
Hmm.
that look legit on the surface.
Right. Yep. Yep. Even some nail studios, like I remember I was in college. I was living in Houston, downtown Houston, and I went to go get my nails done. And I remember like a bunch of men like coming out from the back, like blue collar looking men with khakis and a polo shirt, right? Like coming out, and the lady would hand them a bottle of water. And like I was so naive, like I didn't know. I was just like, well, why are these men coming out from the back? But then later on, I was
A lot
like,
of men getting pedicures now. I guess.
exactly. I was like, oh my God, these men in broad daylight were getting probably like, BJs from a sex worker in that nail shop or something.
Wow.
Mhm. Heavy stuff.
Yeah. That's wild. Okay. So how does this link into your work of looking into Polaris and exposing them and exposing the sex trafficking hotline for
Mhm.
really not being helpful resources that fight against sex trafficking?
Yeah. So it's all kind of wrapped up in why I even started my organization. Like I just had this like urge to start an organization of my own, but I wanted to approach things differently. I just didn't know what that was until I met my ministry partner, one of my ministry partners who owns a small she's like an intake house. Like she actually goes and rescues the sex workers off the street, or she'll like provide a house or like a space for them to escape. She became interested because my initial idea was like, we should have just like the daily traffic, where I was like, we should have just one place where all the sex trafficking headlines are just there. Like you can find them there. I was like, we should have one place where you should be able to go find the ministries that are around you. Plug in 77077 or whatever, Houston, 90210, whatever, put it in, and you find your nearest ministry, right? You should be able to do that. What are the needs or the volunteer opportunities? What do they need? Because literally there was one ministry here in Houston, again, different one time they just needed tampons and detergents and snacks for their survivors. Like it literally is something so specific. And I'm like, we should be able to go and see where the needs are. Because for what a long story short, don't want to go on a tangent, but basically a lot of the federal system is not really doing a great job at helping these smaller ministries.
Yeah, they're raising so much money, like the Polaris Project and the sex trafficking hotline. They get so much money, and you did a wonderful breakdown on your YouTube channel.
Mhm.
You're showing exactly how much money is going into like salary and executive salaries. Yet
Right.
you've done all this work, and so many folks have tried when they call the sex trafficking hotline, they're on hold for 30, 40, 50 plus minutes.
Right.
Which if a girl who's in need and maybe she's got 10 minutes in a bathroom stall at a rest stop, that's all she's
Mhm.
got. And who knows if their phones are monitored, they make their way to a
Right.
phone or whatever. And it's like, yeah, they don't have time to be waiting on hold for 30 minutes. Are you kidding?
Exactly. So one of my ministry partners who first like saw into what I wanted to do with the organization, she was like, that's a good idea. She was like, I believe in it. I was like, so what do we do to like launch? Like, how do we even approach this to identify these gaps? She was like, well, you should really look into the human trafficking hotline. And I was like the hotline, the 1-888 number. And she was like, yeah, that one. And what she had explained to me, and this was just like her one-on-one testimony with her and her survivors, was that when her survivors would call this hotline, basically exactly what you said, they were holding for 45 minutes, an hour, over an hour, all these things. And I was personally like a little taken back because I had no idea. But of course it would be someone like her who has this first contact one-on-one with survivors to even know this information. And so I was like, okay, we'll take it on, right? And so what I did, I basically put out a call. I was like, hey, I need research help on my platform. I think I put it on Instagram. I was like, hey, we're going to look into this organization, but I need some extra hands. And God, literally, it was a divine thing. Like, he brought me the best people, like the best researchers that were so like dedicated, put their heart on it. We're all unpaid volunteers, right? So it's like they really had a passion to find this out. And so for the past 2 years, as so much data. I mean, 990s, first of all, I had no, like,
What's a 990?
A 990 is a tax form that nonprofits, basically a tax form for nonprofits. So a lot of this illustration of what they're doing comes from a 990 matched up with their mission statement. So that's how you can really start to flesh out what do you intend to do and what have you been doing with all this money and all that. So started off not knowing anything about reading this tax form whatsoever. Now you hand me a 990, I can read it to you like a bedtime story. So that's what we did for the past 2 years. Was we looked at the people of Polaris, their relationships. Of course, what draws in initially was the whole Clinton connection, right? The Clinton Global Initiative and how they promoted the hotline and onset them and all these things. That's what initially got us sucked in. But it was like, I feel like in our day and age, we all as truthers need to do a better job of not just saying it's the Clintons, so that's why it's bad. It's like, no, we need more data. We need more information. We need to be able to flesh this out and illustrate it. Why is it bad? You can't just say because the Clintons. Look at their financials. And so that's what we did.
I think saying, oh, it's the Clintons, that's a way to be like, well, that it's inaccessible. They're so high up the food chain. There's nothing I can possibly do. You couldn't possibly see how that trickles down to maybe lower level functionaries and putting a dent in the whole thing. So I understand why you say that just to dismiss it.
Right, exactly. So this was, and see, here's the thing, like with combating human trafficking, a lot of people understand on both sides of the aisle that this is not a political issue. It should not be a political issue. This should be like a very straightforward, like, hey, like we all need to come together because it can be like anybody.
Not trans and kids shouldn't be a political issue.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. 100%. I agree. And here's the thing, like with trafficking, it happens to everybody on both sides of the aisle, and it's done by everybody on both sides of the aisle. Right. So it absolutely is a unifying topic. And so that's what we really wanted to flesh out with this whole, Polaris project issue.
Mm-hmm. And you realize that they are taking in a ton of money from private charities and federally or from tax dollars, and it's not going to what they say it's going to, because why would you be on hold for 30 minutes if they're paying enough people to work?
Right. Well, and see, as a little bitty preview to the entire report, which people can go to countertraffickingalliance.com. It's like the first button there, and it's a 7-page like expose or, report, breakdown, whatever. But one of the things that was like, I'm telling you, the timing was just perfect, because when we were starting to form this report, remember, we've been working on this for the past 2 years. Well, we learned while we were bringing in this report, compiling this report, that earlier this year, a bunch of these bipartisan attorneys general, they were like, yo, this hotline is not providing us with the crime or the law enforcement with crime tips. So like, we already had our basis of like why we were looking into it, right? It's like 40-minute, over an hour wait time. The victim is going to be in trouble with their pimp, right? But not only that, this was like a cherry on top, that as we were compiling this, we found that the attorneys general were all like, Democrat and Republican were like, there's a problem with this hotline. They aren't sharing tips with law enforcement. And this is what they are signed up to do in order to receive their federal grant. That's what they're meant to do, is to give resources to the survivors and ingest these tips and share them with law enforcement, and they weren't doing that. That's crazy.
Wow. And then so you're basically unearthing that these corporations are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then you take note of things like, oh yeah, Eliza Blue, she definitely did a lot of damage to the movement. And in fact, it's funny you bring up Polaris. Polaris actually gave Eliza Blue a Polaris Star Survivor Award. I think it was this year, and I think she received it shortly after people were putting together the pieces on her, and she was being exposed for kind of a grifter in the sex trafficking realm. So it's interesting. I wonder, well, clearly she's linked up with Polaris, and they can sort of use her as, I guess, a puppet to make them look like, see, we're doing work. Here, we gave out this award. Look.
Yeah. I mean, it still is very confusing for me. And I kind of explained to you before we started the stream, like, when all that stuff was popping off earlier this year, and she couldn't answer. I mean, it should not be hard. And if you're put in that position, if you're in a position where you're like a survivor leader, from my experience, from the ones that I have heard, from the ones that I have worked with, they're pretty transparent about their testimony. They don't have reluctancy to tell you what happened, how, and not only that, it's like, if you're put in a position where you have this influence and affluence to maybe prevent these signs of grooming or entrapment, all these things, you're absolutely obligated as a survivor leader to be preventative in that. So if people are asking, if you're in a position where you're very public and people are asking you to clarify your position and you're reluctant to do that, then there's a lot of things that are going on with that. But yeah, bringing it to Polaris, one thing that we learned in this dig was that, Polaris is very entangled with Palantir, which is like it's like a surveillance software. So think about this, like, and I'm going to connect it, I promise. I'm going to try to connect it at least. Palantir was they got their first like onset with the government, with the CIA. Like the CIA was like their startup fund, basically, like, here's money, this is what we want you to do. And Palantir is used in a lot of different things, like military, like military surveillance and advising. There's a lot of shady things that are not quite clear about Palantir, but they are utilized with Polaris project on data ingestion. So all of these that's another thing. When you call into, and I actually personally, that I don't ride on what my past, what happened to me. I've never been trafficked. Let me clarify that. But there was an incident with me where I actually called the National Human Trafficking Hotline in 2017 to report an incident that could have happened to me. And I know what they ask. They basically ask you everything. What's your name, your date of birth, basically like a police interview, right? And what I reported, the reason why I called them and not the police was because what could have happened to me was in Los Angeles. And even at that time where I wasn't even quite red-pilled, I didn't trust LAPD. I just didn't. And so I opted to call this hotline, and they asked me for pretty much everything. What was the name of the person? What makes you think that they're going to do this? What are the details? What was your timeline in Los Angeles? All these things. And so once I was done with that report, like, I basically tell them everything. They were like, okay, well, we documented what happened. We're going to keep this documented in our system. And then it was kind of like nothing happened, right? So it was, for me, ever since 2017, like it was weird. I put it in the back of my head, but I didn't really think anything of it. Now, fast forward, when we were doing this dig on Polaris project, I was like, oh my gosh, they did ask all these questions. And I spoke to a mother who lost her daughter to her trafficker, and her testimonies on one of the testimonies and grievances, I think it's like the last testimony, but she basically said the same thing. She was like, I fed them license plate numbers, hotel names, hotel numbers, all these things. And I have no idea where these things went or how they process these things. So taking it back to Palantir, which is a surveillance software that Polaris Project is in partnership with, it's like, what is really, and I don't know the answer. That's the troubling thing. I do not know the answer to all of this, but then it makes me think if they are in cahoots with this, federal contract, whatever, right? They work with the DHS, the CIA, a bunch of these other little arms and branches of the government, right? The FBI, CDC, the United States Marine Corps, all these things, missing and exploited children, all of these little branches. It's like, if they're in cahoots with all of these different branches of the government and military, then what is really going on with influencers? Just saying, I don't know, and I'm not painting this person to be connected. I just wonder, because Polaris Project doesn't really have a known program, at least from what I see, for the survivor leaders to be in the influencer space and all this. So from what we know, in a nutshell, people questioned Eliza. She couldn't provide receipts. There's like this weird piece on her that doesn't really provide much more context.
Her background in being a video vixen and all the receipts of videos of her bragging about it, being proud of that. And it's like, well, wait, the years aren't really lining up. And are you doing music videos at the time you were being trafficked? And how does that work? And just people asking basic questions, and she just doesn't want to talk about it.
Right.
And the censorship that followed. She was tight with Ella Irwin, who over at Twitter. So many people still censored, still don't have their accounts back. Just that was allowed to happen.
Yeah, and see that's the thing that I think creeped me out the most was the censorship. A part of that. And and let me just preface, as somebody who's in the industry, I do understand that someone can definitely get trafficked through, doing videos and all these things. And even I know survivors that have actually been recruiters in the past. Like, they've actually recruited and they've since repented, and they've since I was under coercion, that my pimp literally made me think that, my life was in danger and all these things. So that can definitely, trafficking is nuanced. It's not just like a one straight shot, I kidnapped this girl and she's trafficked. There's a lot of psychological manipulation. So I just want to clarify that actually that can happen. It's the fact that she did not want to open up about her testimony and how exactly she was entrapped in the world. And if you are taking in thousands of dollars in donations, you absolutely owe the public, that sort of transparency. Now, if a survivor is reluctant to open up about their testimony, they are not in a mental capacity to be out in the public in that respect. You know what I mean? It just doesn't match up. You need to be living a private life where you're recuperating, you're rehabilitating yourself.
Just like a vet with PTSD should not be recruiting for the military.
100%. So that's where it's just the scene and the nuances just didn't line up. Right. And so that's what really kind of creeped me out about Polaris Project presenting this award. And it's like, how did you get in with Polaris Project? How did you get that recognition?
Get in with Elon Musk. My gosh.
All of that is a mystery, and that's what till this day it remains a mystery. But again, I'm not saying that none of that can happen. It's just it didn't match up.
Why people started to question Eliza. What do you think was the backlash or the effect that she had in this space or on this work? What do you think was the ripple effect?
What do you mean?
Like in terms of do people that work in this anti-sex trafficking world, are they more questioned now? Free Eliza Blue, are they less?
God,
are they, is there how is she negatively impacted?
I am so glad you asked that question. It has been such a negative impact. I mean, we're also in a bit of a culture war, if you haven't noticed as well. We have a lot of the the red pill stuff is also, kind of conflicting with all this, like rightfully so. Yes, she was called out, but then it's also created this culture of, we can't believe victims because they're all grifting and they're all making these false testimonies or these false stories. So therefore, we just won't trust anybody. And it's like, in the past, like especially when I first began in the whole outreach ministry, industry, I remember that it was like such a shocking thing that when a survivor came forward, it's not like not in the sense of the Me Too movement, but it was like you had a lot of detail to support what exactly you went through. Nowadays, because of what she's impacted and ripple effect within this industry, it's like you have to prove yourself even more. You have to be more concrete, which is not necessarily a bad thing. However, a survivor is recuperating a different way. The way we deal with things and the way a survivor deals with things is completely different, right? When a survivor is coming out of what's called the life or the game, they're recuperating in such a way where they have to rehabilitate their spirit, rehabilitate their minds. They have to unwire a few things. Some of them are in the game so long that they have to learn basic things like washing their face and hygiene. You know what I mean? So it's like, for a survivor to come forward, it's a little bit harder because
and that was part of why what you did was so good, because you would go in and just be like, let me teach them how to do their makeup. Like, I'll do face painting on like the kids, just a little something to brighten their day, like a little bit of self-care.
Yeah. And even it's funny because even or not funny, but it's crazy because when I would offer these, like, hey, to the directors or whatever, hey, the girls' makeup, like if they want that as like a job or something, like I can teach that to them. And they would say, well, can you just like teach them how to like just like skincare, because they don't even know how to, some of them don't even know how to wash their face. I was like, well, and I'm not saying all of the victims are like that, but there are some severe cases where some of them have just been in the game for so long that there are some things that have been lost on them. And that's what I mean. Like, if someone like that who has been so abused and afflicted by this industry, by exploiters and traffickers, and they have been so abused, like imagine coming out to a world where like men are just, and I don't say this to be feminist, radical femme or nothing, but like where men just like they need this extra hard, like you have to prove yourself this or that way, and there's always walking on eggshells. It's like there's two things going on. One, a person made it so hard for survivors to come forward, and then now there's a lot of victim shaming and victim blaming where it's hard for both ends to meet right now. And I think then that's what I kind of took a 2-month hiatus from my YouTube, but I'm thinking that that's what I want to do, is more human trafficking education, because I truly feel that our society needs it. Even down to, and this is not meant to divide your audience on the Tate scandal or whatever, but there are actual definitions that are being manipulated right now where it's like, Candace Owens says, oh, when she interviewed Tate, human trafficking is not what the Romanians are saying. It's like, isn't it when kids are put in a truck and hauled off? And it's like, oh my, I hear that. And like, there are alarm bells in my head. I'm like, Candace Owens just literally, whether she meant to or not, in my personal opinion, based on what different countries all around the world define as human trafficking, she has made this completely different and lessened the definition of human trafficking. That's how bad it is. So it's like now you have the Tate bros who are just regurgitating anything that they're being told from that side, and they're like, oh, the girls could have left whenever they wanted. That's not human trafficking. All these things. I'm like, how are you gonna tell me what human trafficking is or not? Like, I've been in this for 10 years, servicing survivors and seeing it at the border and seeing all these different nuances of human trafficking. How are you going to tell me what human trafficking is or isn't, right? So it's like, it's so frustrating. So now I'm like, in my 2-month hiatus, I take a deep breath and I'm like, you know what? Some people just don't know. Like, some people legitimately just don't know.
Right.
So
there's conscious and unconscious damage being done to the movement. Conscious, probably
exactly.
Eliza Blue. Unconscious, maybe Candace Owens just spoke out of her depths.
Right.
And then you see what's happening with the Sound of Freedom movie, which I'm embarrassed that I haven't seen yet. I'm so embarrassed that I haven't seen it yet. I have to. Just everything kept getting in the way, but that's not really an excuse.
It's a good one.
And it's just such an impactful movie from everyone I've spoken with, and it seemed almost immediately there were some people coming out and saying, well, the Sound of Freedom is a psyop. Look, follow the money. Look at who made it. It's all bullshit. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Like,
my gosh.
Is a net positive here?
Gosh.
Disney sat on, as you explained in one of your videos on your amazing YouTube channel, Disney sat on the rights to this movie for 7 years? They had to fight tooth and nail to get this thing even in major theaters. And then when it did, Disney rushed out and put Indiana Jones the same weekend to squash it, but it didn't. In fact, Sound of Freedom squashed Indiana Jones. It was like the top movie for several weeks. And now we have most recently coming out, it's almost like, wow, we see
like
who knows what the heck's going on with Russell Brand, but now you also see all this stuff coming out that they're really going after. Let me pull this up.
The head of OUR.
Yeah. Sound of Freedom hero Tim Ballard accused of sexual misconduct against 7 women.
Of course.
This just came out today. I mean, I'm seeing a bunch of things come out this week. A married anti-child slavery activist who was the inspiration for Sound of Freedom has been dogged by allegations that he sexually harassed 7 women on overseas missions and took advantage of a Mormon elder.
And so I think these are anonymous 7. Well, which makes sense if it is,
And this is originating from Vice. So I mean, if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know, look at what Vice is doing now. Look at what Rolling Stone does these days. They're just kind of in the business for torpedoing anybody not echoing the mainstream narrative.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, like, I'm gonna wait, just like the Russell Brand thing. I did the same thing for Tate. I just waited. I didn't jump on sides. I'm just gonna wait till more of this is, if they provide more details. I think, like, for instance, when we see things like this, like, it'll show for itself. It'll flesh out whether it's like a nothing burger, like what was that justice that was going to get sworn in, Kavanaugh, when Kavanaugh, was about to get sworn in, and all of a sudden you have all of these, women, and there are unfounded allegations. It's like it'll either flesh out like that, or it'll flesh out like Tate, where there are some credible corroboration. So I'm just gonna wait and see what comes out. It's the safest thing to do.
Yeah,
but it's crazy. But the psyop, there was a psyop though, for sure.
And was it a micro psyop or a regular? You said micro psyops before.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
I want to talk about micro psyops now. It's just all
yeah. So micro psyops. So the reason why I titled it that is because it just, the same people who sort of created this whole narrative that this was the Sound of Freedom was a psyop, because what was that guy Carlos Slim, and all these shady people were involved with the funding of this movie, and all of these things. I'm like, first of all, this is like the first, if not the only, movie that exposes the horrors of child trafficking, and in a way that's not gory. It's not necessarily graphic in the terms of showing things. It's like, this is basically an awareness movie, and all of a sudden you get all of these different things like, well, who's profiting off of this movie? Where are the profit? I'm like, I hope the profits go to the producers, like, because it's a movie, it's not a charity, it's a movie. Like like we have lost this sense of like practicality where everything is something now, and it's like, why can't this just be a movie? I bet you the people who produced Taken, right? Why didn't we go hard on Taken, right? Why are there not exposés on who financed that movie, who produced that movie, right? It's a movie on human trafficking, but nobody's coming after that. It's like, it's just wild. So a micro psyop is, but get prepared, guys. Put your tinfoil hats on and all these things. But basically, there are some really, effective influencers in the truther or patriot space. We merge it into one. And some of these influencers are boots on the ground, like actually going out there. Some people are out at school board meetings, actually gathering the parents and letting them know what's going on. Local civic processes, they're letting their cities, their neighbors know what's going on in their city, right? Look at this corruption. So these very powerful influencers that are very micro targeted on their audience, if that's a Houston influencer, like my friend Marissa Hanson, for instance, wonderful, great research that she does on Houston politics and she lets everybody know, like, look, this is what's on the agenda. She got attacked as well. So what will happen is that you get these patriots that are posed as patriots, and they seep and infiltrate the space, and they pretend to care about the same things that you care about. And then all of a sudden they will infiltrate your circles, your social circles, and they'll start spreading lies, which is what happened with me personally a couple years ago when I first started. I mean, my organization was not even wet behind the ears. It was like I had barely filed for my 501c3 classification. And already it was already being attacked. My character was being slandered, like, Nat, because she has, I said, like, before the stream, like, I'm a big Tim Burton fan. I've been a goth kid for forever, right? So I've always been into Tim Burton, and back in 2014, 2015, I actually adopted his symbol, his logo, and it's a swirl with an arrow at the end. So
cool.
Yeah. So a lot of people were like, these people were like, look, she has a swirl in her past logo. So she's a pedo and she loves this symbology, symbolism's going to be her downfall. And I was like, literally, you can go to Google and search Tim Burton logo and see that he has it on his books. He has it in his art. He has it everywhere. Not every swirl is like a pedo symbol. And it's like, they really, really like did a job on mischaracterizing and damaging one's character, because and it wasn't even like I didn't even have flight time with my organization, but they also did this to other people who, once again, were boots on the ground for different causes. Whether it was for votes and getting people registered and all these things, they attacked them. And so that was the common denominator. All these people who were grassroots or who actually did things on the ground were the ones being attacked. So That's a micro psyop. And the thing is, it's funny because ever since then, we've found out that these people are very connected to, like, and we won't say the M word, the MOSS word, but there are some insinuations that these people are connected to that foreign intelligence. And and it sounds crazy, but it's like you can actually trace it. Like, we have actual traces, but it's crazy that these people who literally, some of them look like Antifa people, some of them actually went to J6 and never got charged. So it's like there's some context clues there that they've definitely infiltrated, like, little patriot circles. And it's not just me. Like, there are so many different little accounts right now that are actually being attacked right now But yeah, that's what a micro psyop is.
I mean, it makes sense if you look at everybody who was able to infiltrate the various groups of people who were attracted to go to a G6 type event for the express purpose of making the whole event look a certain way and to demonize the people in that group and to encourage them to do things that would make them look horrible and, I don't know, put them away in prison for 20 plus years.
Exactly.
So, it's dirty.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that whole thing, once again, that's a really great example is the J6 stuff. And by the way, I was at J6 and that was like a thing, like, oh, because first of all, there was no insurrection. There was no insurrection.
It was a planned march point. It was always on the program. I was just talking about this with somebody earlier today. It was similar to the rally that happened in November, the rally that happened in December.
Yeah.
I thought the mainstream media was going to say this is a non-event. There's no one here. Trump movement is over. He has no audience.
Right.
But it was always the plan to have the speakers in the morning, march to the Capitol at 1:00. But people act like, oh, Trump made everyone rush the Capitol. And it's just, they really love mischaracterizing the day, the people that were there and why they were there.
If you find, here's a telltale sign. If you find a patriot that is saying the word insurrection and meaning it, that is one way you can know that there's something you're trying to do to sway the narrative, because there was no insurrection. And the moment that a patriot acknowledges that the leftist talking points that there was an insurrection, okay, then what exactly are you trying to sway the public to believe?
Like, really, you think people just show up with their American flags? Like, well,
right,
we're gonna take it down with these. Okay, sure.
I had chicken sandwiches in my bag. That's pretty much
yeah. I had a pair of gloves that I bought. I panic bought because it was so cold today.
Yeah. And also, you could probably remember the little sprinkled actors in there. Like I remember an Antifa type guy who had brand new stuff, brand new shoes, brand new patriotic gear.
Them changing out of their out of MAGA clothes weirdly. Like, no one's doing that. So
yeah, I saw this guy. It was like something triggered him when he saw the police, and he called them like effing pigs, like out, like cussing them out. I was like, that don't, like, I get it. Like there's nuanced feelings about police, but I don't think that that's very our side to just do it like that, Yeah.
No, at an event that you willingly came to, why would you cuss off the cops?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Micro psyops.
Micro psyops. What's worse, a micro psyop or a micro penis? I don't know.
It's the same thing.
Oh, we got a super chat from Christoph. If you come off like you still have feelings for your pimps, you aren't ready to be an Eliza level advocate.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because you have to look at, like, it's like we who we're not trafficked people, right? Or I don't know your story or what, but if we're relatively like normal people, and I'm not talking about like abusive relationships, although they do have some traits of, some of the narcissism and entrapment. I'm talking about people who actually went through the trafficking. They actually went through all of that. We don't think in wave patterns the way a survivor would think in wave patterns. So if she is an influencer over not only all the people for education, but also as a beacon of hope for survivors, you cannot be in that position and not be, a transparent. And the thing is, like, her level of influence, your level of influence, and think that you have, this sort of, I guess, essence to influence and to be a beacon of hope. If you are still exhibiting these traits that are not healthy for a survivor, right? You don't want a survivor thinking,
what were some of the traits that she was exhibiting that didn't quite fit for you? Like, what were the red flags that you were seeing? Because I'm sure you are better equipped to see this and saw it sooner than others.
Right. So first of all, it's like there was a lot of conflicts, right? We all saw like the conflicts that were coming out of the receipts. I think what Christoph is referring to is there was like a DM exchange that referenced her pimp, and that, you know, there was some sort of like love exchange or something like that. There were some feelings, but these were, I think they were recent DMs, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
So there was some sort of like emotional, I guess, illustrated emotional connection there. Either it was that, you know, that she was a survivor from this pimp and she still loved him, or she was not ever human trafficked, and that there was a willing relationship, right?
Right.
So I think that's what Christoph is. I think that's what he's referring to, because there were some DM exchanges where it showed that there was a friendly, like still a friendly demeanor between her and the pimp.
Right. And it sounds like she would just hear things, you know, like people like yourself would say, and then sort of
Uh-huh.
regurgitate them to fit her story.
Right.
Something like, "Oh, I wasn't ready to I got re-trafficked. I wasn't strong enough or in a position to leave." Um,
Yeah. And see, that stuff can happen. Like people do get re-trafficked. People get Stockholm syndrome. They go back with their abuser, back with their exploiter, and all these things. It can definitely 100% happen. It's the fact that she couldn't flesh out dates, overlaps, she couldn't flesh out details. And this is just once again, from my experience and from the survivors that I have interacted with, the ones that I've talked to, heard from, they're they're at a place where they are so like mentally, spiritually secure, and that has to happen first, that they were comfortable enough to tell their story, to tell their timelines, and what happened to them, the types of people that were exploiting them. So if people who are survivors without an influence the way Eliza had, or have the ability to be transparent, she, especially because she had an elevated position to do that, she had an obligation to educate the public and survivors alike on what her experience was for preventative care, right? So
Mhm.
you can't you can, she tried, right, to be this figure, but it's like you can't necessarily be a survivor leader and be reluctant to answer questions for the sake of you're risking the safety of other victims and survivors that are out there. And then also you're painting you're paving way for the public to perceive survivors that way, where they don't need to answer up for accountability and all of
Right.
that, right? So that's a lot of damage. It is a lot of damage. And yeah, like we touched base earlier, it does make it harder for the counter trafficking industry for the survivors to even come out. But also what I didn't mention was that now it's like we should have a heightened awareness, hence, Polaris Project and all these things. We should have a heightened awareness about organizations, but do your due diligence to look into them in an ethical way, and not just call every organization a grifter, or because that person is this or that, I don't like what she said on this or that podcast, automatically she's a grifter, or
Mhm.
she's stealing funds. It's like we have to be what I'm trying to say is it's desensitized a lot of the public to just look at organizations with insensitive eyes, and that is a problem, because this is a very sensitive industry, and so are the survivors.
Yeah, it's almost like Eliza Blue has definitely created this feeling of like, all right, yeah, they're full of shit. Yeah, they were just dating that person. Yeah, okay, that was consensual. Like, oh, it's just part of, oh, you had sex, you regret.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, and it can be simplified like that, for legitimate victims. And that's a problem. It's like, we can't oversimplify other people's story just because one person, made all this hoopla that didn't make sense and didn't add up.
Yeah. Wow. It's crazy. And even all these months later, still
Yeah,
the effect lives on.
unfortunately.
It's interesting. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with Tim Ballard and the Sound of Freedom.
Mhm.
But like overall, net positive. Woke a lot of people up,
Good.
fired a lot of people up to the cause.
Mhm.
Just made
It
people
did.
aware that it's real and it's currently happening and it's ridiculous. And even, God, weren't there like tens of thousands of kids that went missing in Hawaii with the whole
Yeah.
wildfire thing? I mean, there's just
Yeah.
and then these stories disappear.
They do. They do. And that's partly why I started the daily traffic. The only struggle is that I'm by myself doing all these platforms and stuff like that. So sometimes I can't. There's a stretch of time. Right now, I'm actually editing a documentary on the Polaris project stuff. So if people don't want to read it all, there's going to be like a documentary. So I'm editing, putting all my energy in editing that. But that's why I started the daily traffic, was to keep all these headlines together. So it's like you can tell, like, oh, there is a sting and a bust and all these things happening, but it's like these unaccounted things happen where it would be the onus and the responsibility of our federal government to be transparent and keep accountability of these children. But what gives it off is the fact that they are willing, they're doing the opposite. They're willingly not. They would rather omit that from the public's knowledge. And that's what makes this even more nefarious, with stuff like the border and children going missing, and then stuff what happened in Hawaii. It's nefarious and sinister.
Yeah, it just seems like they go out of their way to leave out those stats or just not pursue.
Right. Exactly.
Wow. Sorry for the
crazy.
serious episode, guys. No, but this is a very important topic, and I'm very lucky that Natly was able to share her time with us and
For sure.
explain this in more depth. Natly, what's coming up for you? What are you working on, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to kind of pivot into more human trafficking education on my YouTube, and maybe other topics too. It'll be like a little mixed bag. So that's what I have plans. But more than anything, I'm going to be concentrating a lot more on Counter Trafficking Alliance. What we're trying to do in a nutshell is, because of what we discovered with Polaris Project, is we want to centralize the needs of these smaller ministries that we may not know the name of. So we are looking for a lot of on the ground work, and a lot of it is like the phone calls. Like we're forming a system where we can keep track of who needs what. And so that's what we're building right now. It's a big feat. It's a humongous project, but it's like, why haven't we? Millions of dollars are being poured into these NGOs and nonprofits, and as we showed on the report, it's like all these millions of dollars of our tax money is going towards this hotline, but then where are the safe houses? Where are the resources for the survivors? Right. So we're just trying to answer that. So that's a big it sounds simple, but it is a humongous, entailed, very intricate project that we're working on to build that up. So if anybody is interested on, if you're good with calling, you could start a Google number, helping us with that effort. We'll be outreaching to all the smaller ministries to build that centralized knowledge center of who needs what. So that's basically what we're doing. Want to service survivors and actually get them what they need.
Wow. Actually doing good. What a novel idea. Natly, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Chrissy.
And talking with me today. I think you're incredible. You're literally like a living saint. And guys, check out Natly's YouTube channel for more great videos on this topic. Follow her on Twitter and check out the countertraffickingalliance.com website. Thank you to the chat.
Yes.
And any closing thoughts?
Just have grace. People, if you're listening and you think of the topic human trafficking, have grace and know that it doesn't just happen to children, it also happens to adults. And just have a graceful heart for these stories that come out and not automatically think that everybody's trying to grift you. Some of these stories are genuine. So that's what I have. Just have grace.
It's great. Thank you, Natly. And
Thank you.
I'll see you guys next time. Bye.